Hi, everyone. So this is Java E on Azure Mystery Magic Show. I'm REZA RAHMAN. I'm in my day job. I'm Principal Program Manager at Microsoft. That means really I work with many different teams at Microsoft, sometimes almost 20 or 30 different teams that all do bits and pieces of Java here and there. But me being somebody that's been in the Java EE ecosystem for a very long time, actually a large part, some part of my job is to support Java EE developers and Java EE vendors and Java EE runtimes on Azure. So this is basically what this talk is about. To see what are the different flavors and what are the different things you can do with Jakarta EE these days on Azure, and there's quite a bit of that. This is not actually going to be a talk where I'm going to be doing any lectures whatsoever. It's these days I've switched over to what I call like slide-free mode. So no slides whatsoever. I just try to get online and try to do some stuff. So that's what I'll be doing in this session as well. So basically, what I'll be showing is there are a few different ways on most major cloud providers to move your workloads onto that cloud provider. And I'll be showing on a hands-on fashion how that is done. Actually, this talk, I'll show you the material in a second, but basically everything that I'll be doing is already provided as a step-by-step directions, and that's on GitHub. I'll show you the GitHub repository in a second. So although I'll be doing the demo here in about 50 minutes or so, you can actually take your time and do the step-by-step instructions. I've done this as a workshop before, and it takes roughly about 8 hours to get through the content and really understand what's going on and what are all the different trade-offs. Some of the trade-offs, obviously, I'll be talking about here in a second as well. So sit back. Hopefully, you'll enjoy the session, and I hope it goes glitch-free. It's always a little bit adventurous to try to do this kind of live coding stuff. Sometimes most of the time, things are okay. Sometimes you kind of have to do live debugging on the fly, which is not too much fun when you have a big crowd watching you. But yeah, hopefully everything will be fine. So we'll get started here and start doing some hacking and talking about the different options for Java EE on Azure in a little bit. I think the other sessions may be running a little bit late, so we'll give people just a little bit of warm-up time here. In the meanwhile, let me share the URL for the materials, which is on GitHub. You guys can take a look at it at a later point in time, and I'll also give it to the conference organizers so they can take a look at it also. The last thing I want to mention is there's no reason to sort of hold back questions until the very end. Probably I'll be hacking code until the very end is my guess. So if you have questions, just feel free to ask them, and I'll answer them throughout the session. Minutes passed, so I'm going to go ahead and get started and see what happens. So I'm going to turn my video off and share my screen. Okay, so hopefully at this point everyone is able to share my screen, see my screen. Let me hide this button here, and also able to hear me okay. So this is a GitHub repo that I was talking about. It is basically, again, about a day-long workshop. I'll be going through this in about an hour, so obviously I won't be able to go into the entire workshop. But what I'll do is just show you enough so that you can go and take a look at this workshop by yourself in a bit later after I'm done here. That's actually the objective, is to enable you to do that and give you enough of an introduction of the materials so that you can go ahead and do that. So basically, this talk is about showing you the different ways that a Jakarta EE developer could, or Java EE developer could, or Java EE or Jakarta EE developer basically as things always start and is always relevant, even if you are working on the cloud, and that is getting everything running locally. I'll show you the setup for that. Then we'll be talking about various different ways of moving to the cloud, and these are the four main ones. Right? These are not limited certainly to that, but these are the four primary ones for Jakarta developers. The first is IaaS, or Infrastructure as a Service, and this is really nothing much more than running a Java application server on a virtual machine. Very old technology. We've been running VMs for I don't know, since at least the 2000s, running technologies like VMware. So this is very much like that. It's sort of that stereotype of your computer on somebody else's machine. In this case, the machine is going to be Azure. So we will take a look at this. This is the easiest path of getting onto the cloud. It's, like I said, it's very, very similar to what you may be used to in your data center, and you'll see that as I go through the steps. Then there's PaaS, or Platform as a Service, and this is a situation where you only are dealing with your artifacts. So everything else is created for you. So really, in this case, you would just be deploying your WAR file and doing just a few wizard steps to set up your PaaS environment. Azure does have one, so we have JBoss EAP as a managed service on PaaS. I probably won't be showing you the PaaS too much. The PaaS is the highest level abstraction, if you will, and IaaS is the lowest level abstraction, if you will. Kubernetes, I think of it as sort of IaaS, but one layer up, where you don't have to deal with operating system level concerns, and you're dealing with infrastructure as metadata almost. So you're describing your infrastructure in YAML, and you'll see what I mean by that. So there's a reason why Kubernetes is so popular, and I'll be showing you that path as well. And you can compare and contrast with how that looks like with, for example, a virtual machine-based setting. If there is time, I'll show you another thing called Azure Container Instances. It's very interesting in the sense that you're able to use containerization, namely Dockerization, and Dockerize your application. If it's a very simple application, you're able to do that and deploy it onto Azure without necessarily dealing with Kubernetes. So we'll see if there's sufficient time for us to do that or not. If there is, awesome. If there isn't, I don't think it's going to be a very big deal. So let's go ahead and get started and get things running locally. So to save time, I have cheated and I've done a few things ahead of time to save us time. So again, these are the step-by-step instructions that you can follow by yourself. We'll basically be doing a very simple CRUD application. You'll see the application in a moment, but it does have all of the bits and pieces necessary for a Jakarta application. The majority of the technologies are there. I'll be using Eclipse for this. You can use any IDE that you want. I'll be using Payara as my Jakarta runtime, but you could easily use Wildfly or OpenLiberty or what have you. I'll be using Postgres. Again, you can use any database server that you use any database server that you and set up Payara ahead of time. I've downloaded and set up Eclipse IDE for enterprise Java developers ahead of time. I am using Docker. I don't necessarily have to use Docker, but I'll explain why I'm using Docker in a moment. But most certainly, we will be using Docker for the Kubernetes portion of this talk as well. And of course, I have this code downloaded. So because it's a CRUD application, the first thing to do is that you need a database up and running. So I'm using Postgres. I could have installed Postgres locally if I absolutely had to. I prefer not to do that because I have no use for Postgres. Otherwise, there's no purpose for it. So a very easy way to get around this is to just run a Docker container. And what Docker will allow you to do is just run the image and download and run the image, Postgres image on the fly without an installation on my own machine. And when I shut it down, the image goes away and I don't have any Postgres installation on my machine anymore. So it's a really nice, easy way to get things started. Hopefully you can see my screen. I'm going to just maximize this so you can see it. I'm going to explain the Docker syntax to you, just in case you haven't seen Docker before. So this is Docker run, which is run a Docker image. IT stands for interactive. I do want this to be interactive. RM means when I shut down this command, don't bother keeping around a copy of the image. I don't need it. I'm giving the image a name, in this case, Jakarta Cafe DB, just in case something goes wrong and I need to resurrect this. I need to be able to refer to it by name very easily. The -v portion is important because we're running a database. So one of the things to understand about Docker when you're using it is how the Docker file system works, as well as how Docker networking works. So because this is an image, as soon as I shut down the image, all of the file system will go away. So I can't have that for a database. It's kind of have that for a database. It's here. So as such that the data is always stored on my own machine. Even if I shut down and restart the image, the data will still be there. And then finally, it bears to explain the -p 5432:5432 syntax a little bit too. So when I'm creating a Docker image, it is running in its own little subnetwork within my own machine. So it's different from the network system of my own machine. I cannot, and that entire network, all of the images are sort of in their own data center, surrounded by their own little firewall. So in order for me to access this database, I need to open ports. So that's what the -p command is doing. It's literally saying, open up this port on this image, so the person from running on the local machine can access it. Okay. And finally, you have Postgres, and that's the name of the image on Docker Hub in this case. So I'm just going to run that image from Docker Hub. So let's run it. So as you can see, no installation really necessary. I already had Postgres up and running, and I reran this command a bit earlier in the day. So that's why Postgres, the binary is already downloaded into a cache, and I was able to very quickly start up. So now this database connection is listening on 5432, and I can refer to it that way. So let's close this down in a second. And here's my application. It's a very simple CRUD application. There's really nothing fancy to it whatsoever. I'll just show you the POM file real quick. And as you can see, it's a very typical Java EE application. It really has just one dependency. This is the one right here. And that is a dependency on Jakarta EE API. As you can see here, the new one, 8.0, that's all. So I won't go over the details of this application. You can do that by yourself. It's basically a Maven-based application. It has all of the bits and pieces of Java EE, like CDI, JAX-RS, CJB, JPRS, CJB. Okay, it's clean. I'm going to build it. Okay, it's built. So I have my WAR file. If you look up here, here is the WAR file. If you look up here, here is the WAR file that was generated as a part of my package command. So I have a WAR file ready to go ahead and deploy. I do have a server configured. In this case, I have Payara 5 configured here. I'm going to just go ahead and start this up, run this application. And it's going to start up in Payara 5. So I've had my IDE running a little bit while, and it's gone idle. So it's going to take just a moment for this to get started here. So while that's going on, these are all the instructions to set up the IDE and set up Payara. You can do that essentially by yourself when you can. And then finally, when I have the application up and running, it's going to be running on localhost port 8080 Jakarta EE Cafe. I'll show you that hopefully momentarily. Hopefully my Eclipse is unfrozen. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so there's my application. It's deploying, and it deployed. Okay, so for some reason, the internal browser of Eclipse doesn't handle the CSS too well. I'm just going to load this up onto a local instance here. As you can see, this is just a CRUD application. Let me just delete one of this data here, and I'll re-add something back. And that's it. That's the extent of the application. It's not supposed to be fancy. It's just to show you that it's a real Jakarta application that has some real components to it. Okay, so that's it in terms of all that we're going to do locally. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and shut down Eclipse just so that it's not in the way. I don't need this database instance anymore, so I'm going to do a Control-C, and the database is shut down, and we're ready to go and ready to move on to our next step, which is to move it into the cloud. So we'll start with the easiest way to get into the cloud, which is infrastructure as a service. I'll show you the basic moving pieces to this, but it's not really that complicated. It's largely very similar to what you would do on your own local data center, as you'll see in a moment. So just like we were running Docker locally, you will need a Docker instance over here. So rather, a Postgres instance locally. You will need a Postgres instance on the cloud as well. You need a database. So there's many different ways that we could do this, but frankly, the easiest way to do it is just to use a managed PaaS on Postgres, which we do have a Postgres offering on Azure. Again, just to save us a little bit of time and to be able to get through this a little bit quicker, I've already created the database instance. So here's the database instance. And hopefully you can read this. Let me increase the font size a little bit. It says Azure Database for Postgres Server. Okay, so it is already up and running. It's up and running on this server name, as you can hopefully see. So this is where I can connect to the database. So it is already up, already ready to go. So you can go through these steps and do it yourself, and you don't need to pay anything. You can get a free subscription for Azure for about a year to try all of this stuff out by yourself. So next thing we're going to do is go ahead and start the VM or the virtual machine to get all of this up and running. So I'm going to go to the Azure portal. You can provision resources many different ways on Azure. But generally, I find that the easiest way for me is just to use the Azure portal. And it's also a more user-friendly experience as well. It's a beginner-friendly experience. So I'm going to go ahead and create my VM. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to be using Ubuntu. I just prefer Ubuntu for these sorts of demos. But you could use pretty much any Linux server, and it should be perfectly fine. Red Hat is actually the most popular one on Azure. So we'll do a create resource, and I'll enter in the VM image that I want, which is Ubuntu Server 20.4 LTS, and I'm going to hit create. And here I'm presented with some options of how I want to go ahead and create my resource. First of all, I'm going to create a resource group. So think of it as a logical grouping of resources on Azure, sort of like your own little data center. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new resource group and give it a name specific to myself to disambiguate it. Okay, so we already have that. So I'm just going to select it. Jakarta eCafe Group REZA. So there we have it. I'm going to give the virtual machine a name. So I'm going to need to refer to it with this name. So I'm going to give it this name here. Jakarta eCafe Server REZA. And ECS is fine with me. I don't want infrastructure redundancy. The image is the one I want, Gen 1. I'm going to see, I think the size is perfectly fine. It's about $30 a month. That's a reasonable for a server. I do need to access ultimately this machine, right? So I'm getting a VM, but I need to set up the VM. So I will need SSH access onto this machine. Normally in a production environment, you would use a SSH public key to do this. This is just a demo. I'm just going to use a simple password. And I'm going to give it a username. So Pyara is the username I'm going to use. And I'm going to give it an appropriate password. I'm just copying the password from here. If you're doing this, please do me a favor and either delete your resources right away or please use a different password. Okay, so we do want some selected ports. So in this case, we're going to select port 22. We need SSH access to this machine. And we're going to be using both the HTTP and HTTPS ports. So we'll leave that open as well. So let's just go through this for a second. Disks, premium SSD, that's fine. The defaults are fine. Let's look at the networking. Virtual network, subnet, public IP. This is the IP that I'm going to be given. Yeah, I just want a basic NIC. I do want both AT, HTTPS, and SSH open, so that is all fine there in terms of its settings. Let's move on to the next one. Management. Not much here to worry about. I think all the defaults are fine. Don't need any advanced settings. Gen 1 is fine in my case. So moving on to tags, no tags necessary, and I'm going to review and create. I'm going to take a final look at all my settings. It should be perfectly fine. Okay. Preferred phone number, all right. Religion past. And resource group name. So let's take a look. Okay. East-West, Ubuntu server, 2 CPUs, 4 GB of memory. That's plenty. Password Payara, public open ports, SSH, HTTP, and HTTPS, premium SSD, virtual network, and so on. So I think we can go ahead and hit create. So when I do this, it's actually, for me personally, pretty amazing. The reason for this is that this used to take weeks, to deploy a machine. So it's pretty amazing that we can do that a lot more quickly these days using Azure. But it's not instantaneous, right? It still takes a little bit of time for the deployment to happen. You'll see in a moment, just how long it takes to go ahead and provision a basic machine, and to deploy it. So obviously, this would be normally, frankly, be fine, in a realistic scenario, but in a demo, it's obviously a time killer. And this is why the reason that I was taking a few of the shortcuts just to get us moving a little bit quicker along this path. So we'll allow this to happen. And while this is going on, I'm going to take this time to tell you what is going to happen next, what the explanation of what we're going to do next as soon as this deployment is complete here. So let's take a look. Okay, and you can see the deployment steps of what exactly is going on as well. So first thing we're going to do is go ahead and SSH onto this box from my local machine. So once this process is done, I'll be given a public IP. I'll be able to access this machine from the public IP using SSH. I can actually set up the environment. This will just be Ubuntu. There's nothing on it, so there's no Java by default. You will need to install Zulu. So in order to do that, I'll be doing just a little bit of manipulation of APT, which is a package manager on Ubuntu, adding the Ubuntu server configuration and some keys, and adding Zulu as a repository. And then finally, I'll be able to do an installation of Zulu. Okay, so that's going to be the sudo apt install of Zulu 8. I'm using JDK 8 for this app. You could probably use JDK 11 and still be fine. I will be installing Maven locally on this machine as well. Normally, you wouldn't be doing this. Normally, you would really be having Maven running on a CI/CD server. But just for this demo, I'll be downloading the application locally and building it using Maven, very similar to what you would do on your own local machine for local development machine. So I think our resources is actually created already. So we can go ahead and actually log on to this machine and begin doing the setup for real. So let's go ahead and do that. Clear this so you can see this a little bit easier. This is really nothing much more than logging onto the machine. So here's what I get the machine IP address. Let me blow this up a little bit more. So here's my server, the instance that was just created. Here's the public IP address. I'm going to copy this over and hopefully be able to connect. Yes, I want to connect. Yes. Okay. And password. I think I mistyped the password. Okay, let's try that again. All right, so I'm now on this machine. So basically, this is going to feel exactly like my own server. This might as well even be local at this point, and this is really as simple as that. So we'll go through the rest of the steps to set up Pyra to validate that yes, you can do that, and it is really as simple as that. So let's go ahead and add the key. Okay, key is being added. We're going to go ahead and do a apt, add the repository in apt. It's done. We're going to do a apt update. Okay, that shouldn't take too long. Should be pretty quick. Yeah, it's done. And this will get us ready to install the JDK. So we're going to go ahead and install Zulu 8. Okay, so we are in a little bit of trouble. So to be upgraded, let's do that for a second. Okay, and let's try apt update Zulu one more time. Okay, so it's a little bit of trouble we're having. I'm going to have to debug this a bit later. Let me see if the rest of the commands went okay. Yes, that was fine. That was fine. Okay, did I skip a step? No, I did not. Okay, this is where live demos are always a little bit of an adventure. Let's try Zulu 11. Interesting. So that it also did not work. So let's try installing OpenJDK. Okay, so hopefully everything will be fine here. All right, let's try this. Sudo apt-get update. Okay, that should be okay. And sudo apt-get install JDK8. Open JDK8 should be almost exactly the same thing as Zulu. Yes. Okay, and this will take just a moment to install. So as you can see, it's always a little bit of an adventure, and hopefully we'll be able to get things up and running properly here. So one thing I did want to note is, although you can do this way, and it's a very old school, reliable way of doing things, it is not automatable, right? So I'm needing to install all these packages and run all these commands one by one by myself. You don't actually need to do that on Azure because of two reasons. One is you can automate all of this using something called ARM templates. So you can script all of this and just run a simple script, and the script will take care of all of these details for you. And I'm going to actually go ahead and fix the problem here that I was encountering. Or what you can also do is that you also have these solution templates on Azure, so that do all of these things for you behind the scenes. So you don't have to do really any of this stuff. All of this stuff is automated for you. It's just point and click in the UI. In fact, we have solutions for most of the major application servers this way. WebLogic is one of the key ones that we're working on with Oracle. So if you really wanted to create some a WebLogic server, even with a cluster, even with different integrations, you can just do that via point and click. So you don't have to do this sort of stuff that I'm doing right at this moment. So let's see if our Java install was successful. Should be. Okay, yeah, I think we're all ready to go with our Java install. So I'm going to go ahead and fix this or try to debug what exactly is going on in here. So we're going to go ahead and install Maven next. Yes. Okay, and that should have gone without any problems. We're going to go ahead and download Pyara. Pyara is as simple as just download and run. So we're just going to download Pyara from a location. Now, zip is not installed on Ubuntu by default because of some IP reasons. So we will need to explicitly install unzip. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we can go ahead and unzip Pyara. So that is done. We're going to now unzip the Pyara zip. And that's it. We're get ready to install. We're all set to install Pyara. So now let's get the application itself. So I'm getting it from my own GitHub repo. Okay, the application is downloaded. We're going to unzip the application. Okay, the application is unzipped. We're going to go ahead and do a Maven install of the application itself. So let's take a look at the application and see where it is. So it's jakarta.ee master, and we're going to go into the IaaS directory. There is a copy of the application there. Okay, and we're just going to build the application right here. Okay, so we have our WAR file ready to deploy. Now, for the rest of the steps, I will need to be super user because I'll be opening up some ports on port 80 and doing some change to the Pyara install. So I'm going to need to log on onto SU. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, so now I'm logged on as SU. I'm going to go ahead and start Pyara. I will need to start Pyara in order to make some changes. In particular, Pyara runs on port 8080 by default. We can't really do that because we can only open up port 80 on these VMs. So I need to basically get Pyara to run on port 80 instead of port 8080. This is the command to do that. Don't worry about it too much. You can just take a look at it. It's an ASAdmin command that basically is saying, hey, please start listening on port 80. So I'll go ahead and execute this command. So we're done there. It's executed successfully. Now we can, we'll need to add the database driver. So I do have the database driver downloaded here. I'll need to issue another ASAdmin command, add library, as you can see in the command line, to add this jar file to Pyara. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So that's executed successfully. Now all we really need to do is deploy the WAR file, and really we're ready to go. So we're going to go ahead and deploy the WAR file now onto Pyara. So it's ASAdmin deploy. So we're doing the deployment. Okay, and we should have a Pyara instance up and running now with our application, and it's running on Azure. So it's always interesting for me to when I do that. So let's try just with no arguments whatsoever, and we'll get the Pyara instance, and now we'll run the application itself. Here's our application, and I have I reused, as I said, I created the database before. I was testing it around, so we have a few record entries here. Just because we lost some time trying to install Zulu, I'm going to move things forward and not really do very much here. But basically, that's your VM story, right? It's as simple as as that. It looks very much like what you would potentially do in your own laptop. Right? It's as simple as that. So I'm going to. That's where we're going to go next. And where we're going to go next is actually in our Kubernetes directory. Right. So, okay. All right. So let's begin to move around from there. So as I said, let's move on. The next, as I said, I can show you PaaS. I can show you Docker ACI. It's going to take a lot of time, but I think what I would like to do instead is show you one of the more popular options, which is Kubernetes, so that you can actually take a look at, just from a functional standpoint, what the similarities and differences are in doing all of that. So first thing is you need another Postgres instance. Again, we already have it up and running. Let me go back and reopen the portal. I accidentally closed it. So again, we have our database up and running. So there's a database, right? Azure database for Postgres Server, as you can see. You will need a Kubernetes instance to get this up and running. And again, it takes a little bit of time to create it. So in order to save time, I've go ahead and created it beforehand. So here it is, Jakarta eCafe cluster. So as you can see, this is Kubernetes service. There's a few things up and running here. Let me decrease the font size a little bit and show you that it is up and running and has been for a little while. So I'll click on the Insights window. And as you can see, it's I tested this out a little bit earlier. So there's some data from my previous runs. Then you need to set up Kubernetes tooling. Primarily, you do that using kubectl. And you need to issue just one command in order to link up your kubectl tool running locally onto your Kubernetes instance that is running remotely. So actually, I've done that. And now, to me, Kubernetes is almost something that is running locally again. So let's say kubectl get pods. And I don't have any pods running right now. I do have a couple of nodes allocated. Okay, so I have 3 machines. Basically, you can think of it as virtual machines allocated and ready to go. So these are my nodes. I should not have any services right at this moment. Okay, so there's no services except for Kubernetes itself, right? Kubernetes itself is a service, and it always runs on each Kubernetes cluster. So that's what's going on. So basically, this is a clean install of Kubernetes right at this moment. So now we're going to begin to build the application, and we're going to begin to deploy the application, sort of similar to what we did for VM. So let's begin to do that. So it all starts with the Maven application war file, same as before. So we're actually going to go ahead and build that again. So we're going to do a npm clean package here. And there we have it. Right. So we have the application up and running. Here it is built, right? As you can see. So here it is built, right? As you can see. So is to take this WAR file and to put it in a Docker and to create a Docker image out of it. So I'll go ahead and do that. And while I'm doing it, I'll explain what I'm doing. First thing I need to do is to log on onto Docker Hub. I'm using Docker Hub as my image registry. So the reason you need an image registry is, remember that I'm doing this WAR file. I built this WAR file locally, but Kubernetes is running on Azure. So I need to upload this image that I'm about to create somewhere. And in this case, I'm going ahead and uploading it to my Docker Hub repository. So the first step to do that is to actually build your image. And I'll show you what a Docker image actually looks like and what it means. So in this case, for now, just take my word for it. I will explain the syntax of what I'm doing. So this is Docker build. So this is building a Docker image. -t means please make this thing, give it a name. So the name that I need to give it is the name of my Docker Hub account, which is RAHMAN. And the name of the image is Jakarta eCafe, and then you can give it a version number, and I'm giving it a version number of V1. Do note the dot in the end. So basically the dot in the end is referring to the Docker file up here, as you can see, this Docker file. So I've described how the image should look like in the Docker file. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so I've run that. And after I've run that, let me show you what I just ran, right? So as you can see, if you take a close look at this, there's step 1, 2, 3, 4. And each of these actually correspond to entries in my Docker file. So here's the Docker file. So this is, in a way, it's an abstraction over what we did in the VM world. So remember in the VMs, I installed Java, I installed Payara, and there was the operating system. All of that is abstracted in a single line called from Payara server. So this is encapsulates an already pre-built image with Payara on it. So there is an operating system here, there's Java here, as well as a Payara server installed here. But I still need to do the deltas, right? The additional things that I need to do. Remember, I did the deployment command. In this case, instead of calling asadmin deploy, which I could have, I'm simply copying over the war file into a known deployment directory on Payara. So when Payara starts, it's going to auto-deploy the application. I still need to upload the jar file for the database, and I still need to invoke the asadmin command to add the library. So that's actually, in fact, exactly what I'm doing. So this is doing exactly what I was doing in the SSH, more or less, except I'm declaring it and sort of scripting it in my Docker file, if you will. So right now, my Docker file is built. It's ready to go. I've given it a version number. I'm going to go ahead and upload this Docker image onto Docker Hub. Okay, so I'm going to push this, and I've pushed a copy to this already. So this is going to go super fast because it's already cached. Yeah, as you can see, a layer already exists. So this is all done already. Okay, so I'm done there. So my Docker, if I go on to log in into my Docker Hub, which I'll do. Okay, as you can see, there's my image, and it was updated just a few seconds ago. Now Kubernetes can read this location, okay, in order to deploy my application. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to issue this command, kubectl control -f Jakarta EE Cafe. And before I do that, let me just check the contents of the Jakarta EE Cafe just for a moment, and I'll explain to you what the contents actually are. How about cat? Yeah, that's all I needed to see. So I'll show you what I was looking at in a second, but let me just issue this command. So this is going to begin to spin up the Kubernetes instance. So this is actually creating all of the instances that I need, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So here's the YAML file that I'm doing. So this is describing a deployment, as you can see, kind deployment, and this is the name of my application, Jakarta EE Cafe. It's in the default namespace. There's some labels. This is mostly just boilerplate stuff. The most important thing to understand here is that I'm running 2 copies of my image. So 2 copies of the application, 2 copies of Payara. That's what replicas 2 actually means. And this is the name of my image. And locally speaking, I actually changed this beforehand to REZA RAHMAN Jakarta EE Cafe :v1, which is the name of my image over here, right? As you can see, right, this is a tag name, and there should be just one tag. Yeah, v1 is a tag that is there. So basically, that is what I specify in my YAML file. Now, in addition to deploying these 2 instances of Payara, I also need to expose this. Remember, this is the same deal as Docker. So this is running in its own little virtual network. I don't have access to it unless I create access to it. And the way you do that is by exposing a service. And I'm exposing a type of service load balancer. And again, I can only expose port 80. So I'm exposing port 80. But since Payara is running on port 8080, I'm actually specifying the target port to be 8080. So when I invoke port 80, it's really going to port 8080 on a given image. So let's go ahead and try to access this guy. And the way we do that is let's see what changes happened in our cluster 2. So get nodes is going to be the same. It's going to be still 3 nodes that I store my pods from. There we go. I'm going to get pods. So as you can see, we have 2 copies, and they're both up and running. You can see status up and running. And I'm going to get services next. Typo. And as you can see, in addition to Kubernetes, I've also created that load balancer instance. So here's the load balancer. It has an internal cluster IP, which I can refer to for internal purposes. But what I actually want is the external IP. So I'll go ahead and copy the external IP here. Enter it. And here we go. We have Payara up and running as well. I'm going to FA. And there's my application once again. So now I'm accessing the same application that I was in VMs, but this time I'm running on a Kubernetes cluster. So you can see the differences here. It's mostly the same, but a little bit different. So everything is a little bit more automated. And really what you're doing is you're describing things like pods and load balancers and storage and so on in all of these YAML files. So it's a lot more declarative in style. So I won't be able to show you the PaaS and the ACI portion. Feel free to take a look at those yourself. Hopefully, it'll be just fine. I will go ahead and make that one update to the IaaS portion and make sure the Zulu works properly for you. So I don't have a whole lot of time left. I'm going to turn my camera back on and see if there's a little bit of Q&A that we can do and see if you have any questions. So let me turn my camera back on. And let me okay, somebody had a suggestion for me. Sudo apt-get install Zulu JDK 8.11 JDK. I will try that. Thank you very much for that suggestion. All right, any other questions? We still have about 3 to 5 minutes, I would say. I would like to stop on time, but if you have any questions, please let me know. No questions at all? All right, well, I appreciate your time. I hope this was a worthwhile presentation. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm easy enough to reach either on Twitter or my email or what have you. So anyway, I thank you for attending the session, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the presentation. That's really it all for me at this point.